Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back, listeners. How are we doing? So it's Wednesday night. It's June. I don't know what it's like where you are, but it's sweltering where I am, Claire.
Oh, it's beautiful here. Absolutely.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? Nice to have a bit of sunshine.
Yeah, mustn't complain.
And I'm not going to lie to you, Claire. I was a bit worried about today's show.
Oh.
Well,
and yet, do you feel like we've gone too far this time? Too controversial?
I was a bit worried. I'm not going to lie. I thought I had I had this like little spark of an idea, and then I suggested it to you, and I thought it was great, and then gradually over time, I've gone, hang on a second. what lion's den are we walking into here?
I've got a feeling, as always, we'll go down some rabbit holes and we'll have some really fascinating conversations about what is at the heart of educational leadership and how things could be, how things should be, and maybe even how things really shouldn't be.
Definitely. I think I want to just say before we start, like, our educational leaders do a fantastic job. They work their hearts out. I see so many people on a day-to-day basis, and this show today, it isn't about slagging them off, and it's not about bringing them down. It's not about bringing them down. I think we just make that really clear now, because like, if you work in education, you're a hero, right? And if you're then managing these complex, horrifically kind of intermingled systems where you pull a lever somewhere and it pulls 4 levers elsewhere, and you in any way improve that, you're doing an amazing job, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So where do you want to start, Claire, with today's question?
Well, I tell you what, let me do a quick ad read and then we can jump in and see where we're at. Excellent. So if you haven't already, we're live here on TTR, Teachers Talk Radio, and there is a TTR newsletter. It comes out every week, full of sound bites, insights, and 10,000 educators receive it each week. It's got 4 curated standout Teacher Talk Radio shows from the week. It also has discounts, offers from the sponsors. So if you haven't already, sign up at ttradio.org/newsletter. And our other partnership is with John Catt Educational, who published some fantastic professional development books and resources, helping improve great teaching and learning across the world in schools. So if you want to find out more, 20% off if you use the code JCTTR2425, and their website is johncatebookshop.com, JOHNCATT bookshop.com. Right. Let's go. So tell us what inspired you to think of this question. Let's start with that spark, hey?
I knew this would come, right? So, I went to a conference a while back. I'm not going to mention which one because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here. But I went to a conference about a month ago, and I went to a talk which was about leadership. And this talk wasn't actually a talk. It was kind of like someone showing the product that they kind of get selling to schools, and it was a Myers-Briggs product.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about Myers-Briggs before I went to it, and then I walked away from the session feeling a tad skeptical. And then I did some research, and I was like, hang on a second, this is based upon Jungian theory, which has got no real empirical evidence behind it. It's just theory, and we've kind of run with it for the last kind of 80 years, and it made a massive impact to businesses and stuff like that. And I was like a little bit annoyed that like this was something that was being kind of sold to schools and kind of as a leadership tool. And so I was a bit worried, and I was like, hang on a second. So that is clearly something which is non-evidenced. It's something that schools have committed to because they pay money for it, and then and like leadership teams have subscribed to it. And then I thought about all of my other experiences with certain leadership programs and things like that. I was, hang on a second, how much are we doing here that is number one, ritualistic, number two, kind of like group thinky, and number three, just takes us in the wrong direction as a leadership in the country. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I was thinking about when you go to a variety of schools and you look at what they do, and then you look at the trends in education as well. So then obviously I'm thinking I'm going down the rabbit hole. I've researched another model which has got evidence behind it, and I'm a scientist. I need you to prove things to me, right? And I also need some evidence of effectiveness. So I've got to think about other things, other rabbit holes that we're going down as a profession, and other things that we've kind of thrown ourselves ritualistically into. And I was thinking, why does this happen? And one of the hypotheses I have is maybe we've got an initiative, a cult of the initiative in schools, whereby driving initiatives is like the big thing, rather than and when I say initiatives, like short-term initiatives to see some sort of short-term gain, which then like you can either use to progress your career, or you can use to say to an accountability structure that, this is what we've done. And I was like, what if this is what we've fallen into? What if this is what we've become? Or, I mean, and then I talked to you about it, and I saw kind of what you were thinking about it, and I was like, or actually, it's what we're coming out of. You said you're in the no camp, and like kind of just looking at some of your posts and looking for some of the things you've been saying. I was like, hang on a second, maybe we're actually coming out of this, and maybe we're on a really nice trajectory. So there's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so let me jump in and respond then, yeah? So it was fascinating when you first said, because I've looked it up when it was in, hang on, get the email right, in 2020, which everyone knows was a great time, I did a Myers-Briggs report, right? So we'll start there. And I found it fascinating because the person that I was working closely with at the time in my senior leadership team had done some work on it and on personality types, and we were clashing, right? So when you like, sometimes it's good to be balanced by people who are quite different to you and who pose challenge as a leader, and there were things that we were going, we're just not, this isn't quite working how it could or should. And he was like, well, I've just done this and it's told me loads about myself. Maybe you could do it, and then we could talk together about what makes us different and compatible and how we work together. And it's not about good or bad types. It's just about recognizing who you are, how you communicate, your work style, things that influence you.
Right.
And I remember thinking the actual assessment itself didn't tell me a huge lot.
Yeah.
But sitting down with someone else and going, oh, right. So for you, actually, you are a real thinker and I might be a real feeler, right? So like in terms of, you like to really process things internally, whereas I kind of like to externalize those and talk through my ideas and process it in that way. And so I think I don't know about cult, but I think there are things that become hyped up and contextualized, and like the next big thing, people go, oh, that's interesting, that made a difference, let's all do it, let's jump on that bandwagon and all give that a go, because I've heard one case study or one situation where that was really successful. But actually, without the context, without the understanding, without the kind of work that follows often, it's not successful, and it doesn't make it work, and doesn't work in different contexts and different situations. And as you were talking, it made me think back when in one of the first schools I was at, in a city school, tough area, really worked hard to get the school from special measures, required improvement, good, and we were going for outstanding, and we were going full out for outstanding when data was king, and our data was not going to be king. Right, because like national was never going to be like where we were like massively above. And don't get me wrong, we got pretty good results in the end. But at that time, I remember sitting in this inset day, which was all about from good to outstanding, right? And so this trainer was going around and sharing all of these things that if you just do X, Y, and Z in your lessons, an inspector will come in and they will be so amazed. And I remember we all ended up having 30 pots of Play-Doh in our classrooms, right? Because what you had to do was your plenary, they had to create something to show what they had learned out of this Play-Doh. Now, don't get me wrong, as a one-off exercise, and I can imagine even in science, right? You might be doing something and you want them to use this as a resource to show with concrete resources what they discovered or learned, whatever. And in some contexts, absolutely fine. But was that really the answer for every single teacher of every single year group of every single subject to get outstanding? No, of course it wasn't, And I think it was about thinking creatively, really, and thinking outside the box and doing things differently. But it's very easy when you've got ECTs, as was NQTs, and inexperienced staff who are just after the magic pill that's going to suddenly transform their teaching or change their behaviour in their class to make it outstanding, and to get kind of sucked into these kind of notions. And I hypothesize that academy trust and the way that leadership's done in terms of that kind of shared school development models might lead to a little bit more of that than once was.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know. In some ways, like we're beyond that whole let's get the De Bono's thinking hats out.
Yes.
And we're beyond
Did
that.
that hit secondary as well? Because that happened to us.
In a really hard way. Yeah, I had a yellow box with a dice and like cards and things like that, and because we were just going for anything and everything, and what really did feel like a cult, to the point where teachers left, older experienced teachers who maybe just used more direct instruction in a kind of cloaked way, or in a non-intentional way, just went, I'm not doing this, right?
Yeah.
And so but then obviously if you were seen to do it and you were an outstanding teacher, then you would be promoted, and what would you push? You would push the ideas that got you promoted, right? And also we're in a framework where you get inspected every 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, it's not the same inspection team which comes every
year.
It's like a different bunch of people who look for a different bunch of things, and there's still no real, the framework's changed, but come on, there's still nothing really concrete in the framework, is it? If you read the framework, it's still a little bit fuzzy.
By a little bit.
I don't know, but no, not even a little bit. Still well fuzzy,
exactly.
Right? And so you still need still room for interpretation everywhere. And I'm not talking about small amounts of interpretation. I'm talking about huge amounts of interpretation everywhere. And so then what happens is we end up with that implementation fever, don't we? Ofsted said this last time they came, and so in the next 4 years we should probably work on this. And Ofsted are coming again now, so we've worked on that, and then maybe Ofsted didn't even look at that when they came the next time round. So now we've got another implementation reset, right? And then what happens is leaders just get into that swing of implement. And I finished an MPQSL last year, and to be honest with you, I felt that as well on the course. It was all about, what are you going to implement? What change are you going to make? At no point did they talk about what gardens are you going to maintain? Do you know what I mean? What plants are you going, which are already there and rooted, are you going to just go and prune and help to grow? There was none of that in the program. It was more change is hard, so let's think about how we change everything in your do you know what I mean? In your current setting. And then the final project was an implementation project. Do you know what I mean? I was asked to work on an implementation project for a SEND strategy school wide, because the Ofsted report said, there's a weakness in SEND. So then that's what I took away. And look, you remember the final assessment, don't you? That's what you remember. If they're willing to assess on it, then this must be a very, very important thing. And so it was all about implementation and change and how to drive change, and in your organization. At no point did we talk about how to de-implement to make room for that change. At no point did we talk about what I was talking about, which is okay, what's working? How are we going to make sure that we keep what's working, and how are we going to make sure? Do you know what I mean? So I think that's where I'm coming from in terms of this cultism. Do you know what I mean? And I'm trying to see whether I'm correct or not really in this conversation. Be interesting to see what our listeners think, right? If please do message in or give us a shout if you think I don't know how to see messages on this. Sorry. If you think if you think leadership is a cult at the moment, then let us know. If you feel like I'm talking absolute rubbish and you don't know leaders in your school who have implementationitis, then give us a shout and tell us I've just got that kind of, I go to these conferences and I go look at what, and I do a lot of reading. And I just feel like we hop from implementation to implementation. And I think and also you get promoted for it, right?
Yeah, and I think and I don't know, in primary, I think it perhaps looks a little bit different, but you're still always after the next thing, right? So you look at your data at the end of the year, go, reading's not as good as it should be, or actually writing seems to be dipping below reading, and then you go, right, so what should we do about it? And someone either reads a book, and actually I'm a little bit guilty. I go to a conference or an event, or I read a book, and generally over the summer I read quite a few books. And I come back kind of buzzing, going, this is interesting. Have we thought about this? What would this look like? And I've got a brilliant deputy now who just goes, should we just hit pause a little bit and just be a little bit strategic over which of those things might be right for us? But I need that, right? I need someone who's going to go, yeah, none of those things are bad, but what's the main thing? And how do we keep the main thing right?
Yeah.
Because it's about moving together on that journey, and actually that looks different in different schools, right? If your school's in a good place and you're just building that and wanting to get stronger, then you've got capacity to do that and take your time and to work together and to kind of make those decisions alongside each other. Whereas actually, if you're in a school where behaviour is really struggling and therefore quality of education is impacted, you haven't got that time. You need to be really decisive and go, no, right, we need to do something now, and we need to give something a good go. Because I think that's the other thing sometimes, is that we are in danger of flitting from one thing to another without actually giving it time to embed and see if it works. And sometimes things might work in the short term and not in the long term, and vice versa, in honesty. So trying to get that balance right is really crucial, isn't it? And so I did MQEL, so executive leadership, last year, and again, it's really interesting looking at how much autonomy within a kind of group of schools in that executive model works to support, let's say, well-being versus impact. So you need to know what's happening and what's working alongside it, but the more autonomy there is, the higher the workload ultimately, because the less you can share across those places. And I think part of getting education leadership right is finding that kind of crucial balance, and working alongside, whether it's one other school, one other person within the school, whatever that looks like, not trying to take something on alone, because then the bigger your evidence bank, the more impact it's going to be. And at a really small level, we've done a lot of work on practice and retrieval and what that looks like, and working across the school, across different subject areas, just gives that broad picture, which makes everyone go, yeah, I can see that working. And it might look a little bit different in my area or in my subject or in a different way of doing it, but actually there's real power in it. And actually it's when everyone comes together and you hear the commonality, which you didn't really know until everyone stands up and starts saying very similar things. You go, oh, okay. So basically we're all saying we need to get oracy right, and then this will fall into place, and then that leads naturally into the where you should be going as an educational leader in terms of your CPD. But if you rush into that process, or you just hear someone talking about oracy being something Ofsted are interested in, you haven't got that same journey, you haven't got that same buy-in, and it's nowhere near as effective.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Yeah, so there's a teacher tap study in 2023. So teacher tap survey in 2023. 55% of teachers say that initiatives don't lead to better outcomes. So half of our people who have been surveyed there, right, who are representative of our workforce, of our colleagues, right, say that the initiatives don't lead to better outcomes. So that's quite interesting. So clearly people are feeling it. Do you know what I mean? I don't think I'm the only one to say to feel that, like, oh, hang on a second, we might be in a cult of implementation here, like an initiative-itis, where like essentially it's one initiative after the next initiative after the next initiative. I mean, look, you mentioned Oracy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie to you, it drives me a little bit mad, that term, right? It drives me a little bit bonkers, like, because it popped up about 6 years ago for the first time, and Voice 21 obviously is a big kind of big driver behind it, and the EEF also are supporting their research into it, and about 6 years ago there was someone who was trying to introduce it, and I went down the rabbit hole, right, and when I looked at the studies, actually it's pretty weak, like really weak evidence, like I look, I'm an RCT, large meta study kind of guy, randomized controlled trial meta studies, and I'm there, right? So if you give me like really, really nice, robust randomized controlled trials where the controls are really well kind of like worked out and really well controlled for, or a big meta study which is showing impact, and then like you can then see the application having an impact somewhere further down the line, then I'm there. And it just wasn't giving me that clear, like the when I looked at the research and data, it wasn't there. It's spurious in the best of cases, and where they've actually found impact, like the moderate impact on learning, that they can't untangle it from other things that have happened in terms of Oracy. However, what I'm seeing as doing is falling down the Oracy rabbit hole really, really quickly. And once again, if your Ofsted inspector has read a TES article on Oracy yesterday, or like has that in their mind, and they come looking for that because the framework has got that in it somewhere where you can interpret to that point, well, and then says that in your report, then you're tumbling down that rabbit hole, right? And not necessarily in, probably because it is, when you look at what like Voice 21 do, and the people who've kind of piloted Oracy in their schools as their curriculums around Oracy, what they're doing is quite well thought through. Do you know what I mean? I'm not knocking what they're doing. It's well thought through, and often it's got a really knowledge rich base behind it. They're not just chatting. They're not just chatting. And actually, one might argue that the build of the knowledge behind it is what is giving them. I saw a head teacher of a quite famous school write a tweet about Oracy the other day, and she was saying, look, our kids we don't do Oracy here, but our kids, they can orate wonderfully. Do you know what I mean? And they can discuss like political things and history and like music and literature and the arts, and I was like quite intrigued by that. But actually I think like some of the underpinning basis, where like when it gets then pushed out kind of nationwide, then becomes really, really watered down and weak, and then we end up in this cultish behavior. We end up in groupthink. We end up with strategy which isn't really based upon the original foundational underpinning, and then we end up with people just going to lessons and doing Oracy, and then or a senior leader going, we need to do Oracy, this is the Oracy strategy, and then suddenly like an initiative like, oh well, stop for 5 minutes and have a discussion Friday. Do you know what I mean? Like, and suddenly and then you stop for 5 minutes and try and have a discussion halfway through a lesson, and like the kids don't know anything, so they can't discuss anything.
No, and I think what actually I think they've described is a very Oracy rich school, because actually if they can debate and discuss and things, that's great, but somewhere along the line someone has taught them those Oracy skills. If I'm honest, like you can say that it's not something that we require in every way, and I guess from a primary perspective, we see more and more children come into school without the basic skills to be able to speak, right? There is a real crucial issue of children's early language development being lacking to the point where the amount of speech and language therapists that are around are not sufficient. So children that were being picked up age 2, age 3, so that prior to starting school, they'd had that support in place, just doesn't exist. And so obviously in the early years, looks and feels quite different as part of the kind of communication and language skills. And actually, if we're having to start on that baseline, right, in terms of teaching children how to make sounds with their mouth physically to be able to talk, then building upon that so that actually by the end of year 2, children have got critical thinking skills to be able to articulate themselves effectively, because they can't say it, they're not going to be able to write it, and if they can't write it, they can't express their opinions. But also there's the kind of social and emotional side, certainly in primary, in terms of how you build relationships. If you can't talk and listen to one another and hear other people's and understand that leads to massive kind of social issues both in and outside the classroom.
Yes, yeah, I agree, but I mean that strikes me as a developmental issue. Do you know what I mean? Like a developmental thing, but then a rollout to all schools nationwide. You know, like if you live in and work in a community where obviously where language, and we're talking about language development here, but I think when it's hit us in secondary schools, that's what it looks like, Claire. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah,
that's what it looks like, and it doesn't necessarily help the kids. Do you know what I mean? Like quite often, like but the strategies I've seen in some of these schools who have a knowledge rich curriculum and like really like think about attention, think about answering things in full sentences and utilizing the knowledge in a way that like in a structured way. Well, the oracy is developed through that. Do you know what I mean? Like so for example, like use like I've seen videos where they insist on a full sentence and then like and they teach them how to form that full sentence, because then the writing also does that. You know, they use the writing revolution as a strategy, and the Hockman method, which has evidence behind it. However, so far what I'm seeing is a rollout of oracy, and when I've looked at materials from schools that push it's not necessarily like it's codified in a way where it could be successfully rolled out, or and the basis behind it isn't good enough. And so then we get like these weird like groupthink kind of implementations of it, and like people go off and try to implement discussion work in their lessons. And if you look at like TLAC strategies, like which is obviously like a knowledge rich methodology like rolled out across schools in America, across all those uncommon schools in America, and Doug kind of went round and picked out, looked at hundreds of schools. You can see there is a habits for discussion section in there, but none of that seems to appear. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem to appear, and then you get this kind of half kind of implemented idea, which then kind of chugs along, and then someone who is from an accountability structure like Ofsted or a trust review board or something like that, or even governance, like comes to the school and goes, "Oh yeah, it's great, they're doing oracy, aren't they?" And hey presto, someone's got a promotion. So this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? This is and it's happened with things like learning styles.
Exactly. And
differentiation.
Having a checkerboard of here's some great speaking listening activities, which ones can you put into your lesson this week, is not evidence-based nor helpful, or actually what obviously should be about. The basic skills of make sure you use a loud voice is not what I'm talking about, but ultimately I think there's some of the stuff on the EAF which looks at research skills, and the obviously is that actually if you learn to talk and then you can learn through talk, and actually that's then focusing on the knowledge that you're developing, right? So putting those skills together of that kind of ability to speak clearly, articulately, to do critical thinking within it, and then be able to apply that to your knowledge in different contexts to further your thoughts and questions and develop those alongside your peers, are two different skills that I think need to come together for oracy.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's codified. It is codified better in TLAC. It's there. It's like it's like the build challenge. That sort of architecture. There's a framework for how to discuss. The framework how to listen. Things like that. Even just tracking who speaks and things like that. Like Doug Lemon has kind of honed it down, but we're not seeing that here. We're not seeing that push as a framework. And that works. It's been shown to work in those schools and shown to develop those schools. And so, but it seems like we're quick to implement and we're quick to roll out, and then we have to deal with all the consequences. And you know what, Claire? If it worked, it wouldn't bother me. If we were doing really well, so I'll join the cult. I'll drink the Kool-Aid, and let's go for it, right? But our kids, aren't benefit from it. Like it's not having like things like this implementation itis. Like spending years on learning styles is just detracting from what we actually should have been doing. Spending years on something like De Bono's hats engagement as a poor proxy, like just things like that as detracted from like years of teaching. And I said it when I talked at where I talked, I think I talked at a conference. I said like it was soul destroying the start of my career, because I did all those things and I was an outstanding teacher, and on results day the shame and the guilt and the pain that I felt when kids walked out of there without GCSEs was horrific. It was like 5 to 6 years of that, right? Where results are opened up on the day and like they haven't learned nothing, but we've been chucking around balls and we've been like thinking with purple hats on and all that business. And some inspectors gone, yeah, it's superb, that guy, the kids really loved it. And they might have loved it. Yeah, or he did oracy. Oh, his discussion work was superb. But in the end, they've walked out of an exam and not got what they needed. The doors aren't open. And those kids who really need education, and need those qualifications and need to walk out of there really knowledge rich to be players in the world because they're disadvantaged, just don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would not bother me if it was doing something for them, but I think that's where it came. That's where the kind of spark came from. Leaders messing around with Myers-Briggs test when there's no evidence, and in fact they could cause harm because you pigeonhole people.
Yeah. And I wonder if coaching, so to move away from oracy for a minute, like coaching is an interesting one, isn't it? That I feel is kind of taken off a little bit in terms of people feel like this is going to be a magic pill. That actually, if you put peer mentoring or coaching or kind of put staff alongside each other and you train up people to be skilled at it. Now, don't get me wrong, I have a leadership coach who is absolutely fundamental, and I probably mentioned it before, to my ability to do my job as a head teacher. But I see that as an external person doing that for me in a kind of paid capacity as very different from the kind of model of coaching that we're seeing moving into schools, I think, more and more, where internally everyone's a leader. So everyone's getting that balance right between kind of leadership and coaching and how you support one another. And I think some of that's come from the kind of ECT framework, if I'm really honest.
Yes.
And I think there is that difference between mentoring and coaching and getting that right, and also the difference between when someone is in that kind of early stage of their career and does need quite a lot of support potentially to get them into that place where they are able to be a fully effective teacher, versus those people who might have been doing this role for a little while and might have different opinions when things come in. But I think there's a real kind of drive to going, this is the answer. Let's just set up some kind of triads or pairs or whatever we want to do. And then what this is going to do is transform everything in our school, and everyone will be outstanding and everyone will be supportive for one another. When actually, yes, there are times and situations when if you get it right, it is really powerful, but not necessary for everyone, and certainly not in a one-size-fits-all model.
Yeah. See, like this is the thing. There are codified methods of doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so Bambrick Santoyo's models, and and Josh Goodrich just wrote like kind of a book on it. And so there's codified ways of doing it. But like you say, sometimes it's just, well, let's just do coaching everyone. Triads, go watch someone's lesson and have a little conversation about how to improve. There's no framework behind it either. And then all of a sudden we just get kind of really frustrating time periods in school. And that's what we don't have in school, time periods. And we certainly don't have time periods to come away and go, what the hell did I just spend 40 minutes doing, or 50 minutes or an hour? Do you know what I mean? We just don't. That if there's anything that sinks a ship faster, it's that. what have I just spent the last hour doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's marking to be done, there's lesson plans to be written, there's just like, you know, finding out how to explain this awesomely. And I've just spent 40 minutes with someone going, well, how did you feel about that? Do you know what I mean? Like, so,
Yeah.
it has to be done well. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I am invested in the coaching model, but that's from a Bambrick Santoyo perspective and a Josh Goodrich perspective, because and I quite like the idea that our profession might be moving to a point where instead of going in and going, outstanding, you did the latest fad, we might be moving to a point where we understand all of these little minor moves that we do in the classroom and how they impact the whole wider system, and we might be able to develop people incrementally in each one of those little plays so that they become super effective, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, just much like what sports coaches do, right? I love that idea. But once again, implementation-itis, right? I've rolled out a coaching program on my CV. I've rolled out a coaching program in my school. I didn't fully go. I didn't read Bambrick Santoyo. You know, why would I do that? I went to like an hour, 3 hours training on it, and it was fine. Yeah, and I haven't read responsive coaching, and I haven't read like this, like all of the guides behind coaching. I don't know who Jim Knight is, and now I'm just going to like launch into it and like go hell for leather on it, and at the end maybe I'll walk away and there's a nice deputy headship going somewhere, and I'll put that on. Do you know, like, this is the sort of practice that it's infuriating, and if you're on the receiving end of it, it's 55% people clearly are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, people rolling out initiatives and them going, oh God, like, this is just another thing to do. And to be honest with you, I didn't have the time to do the last things that you did, and it's not going to have better outcomes. And also, look, it needs the timescales. I'm not blaming leaders though. Do you know what I mean? I'm not blaming the people who implement this stuff. I don't think it's them. I think it's the accountability structures around it. I think it's the 4-year window with a different team inspecting your school every year. I think that's the first thing. Like, they come, they don't see, like, because look, in a senior school, real change comes after five years, really. Like, because you get your year 7s in, and then you work them through that, and it'd be the same for you guys, right? You get year 17 in, you implement something in year 7 for them, and you just consistently do that for 5 years, and you just make it better, and you do that thing with them for 5 years, whether it be behavior or whether it be some sort of system in terms of your teaching. If it's well evidenced and well informed and has been shown to work, and also easy to implement.
Yeah,
because this is the other thing, right? Complex, horrific systems, and adding to them with more complex horrificness, like then. And you just do that for 5 years, then you might see some sort of impact after 5 years, right? Because they'll go through and, like, look, even if it's a curriculum, they'll study your 5-year curriculum and then come out the back end of it, and hey presto, you can see whether it's worked or not. And you would like tweak and implement and measure at specific points, and then you got a 5-year kind of evaluation process. But then if someone comes into your building, like, let's say you're in the middle of a window, and then that comes in after 2 years and then slates it, you might shelf that. and you might never see the impact, at which point, well, I'll move on to the next bit of implementation, and if and the system rewards people who implement short cycles with sharp bursts. You know what I mean? Sometimes, like you say, it's needed in schools. If school needs turnaround, then you have to implement lots of stuff really, really quickly. But quite often those are the schools where, like, there's been tons of like half implemented ideas already gone into place, and they're just crumbling around people. Like, and I love the Dylan William talking about de-implementation cycles, how to actually properly de-implement, because it's quite a scary thing to de-implement something. It is, like, I've had to de-implement things in my department, and it's quite a scary thing to do. People are creatures of habit. When you pull something out of there, they go, what? But in the end, like he says, everything works somewhere and nothing works everywhere. But the key is to persuade teachers to do a less good thing for something more good, more effective. Do you know what I mean? And that's not really an idea that I've seen propagated yet fully through leadership training.
That's interesting. So I wonder why. Like, I kind of hear that and go, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, we can't keep adding and adding without recognizing that, like you say, we need to make room for that impact. We need to recognize that something needs to give, something else to start. And is it that inconsistency that comes with that? Because actually, a few teachers go, oh, no, but that really worked for me. Like that, I really found engaging. And you know, an example might be when you move to a more relational behaviour policy and someone's no longer going to rule by fear or shouting and you know, making children feel ashamed, for example, and instead you're moving to more of a, right, I need the children to really understand what's happened and to reflect on that and for it to be different moving forward. But actually I can do that in a way that isn't shaming, that is just coming alongside that child and helping them to recognise it is to make a difference, not by necessarily needing to raise your voice at them. And actually for some people that's hard because they are so entrenched in, no, but the children are getting away with it, right? If you don't make them cry or don't make them feel, you know, embarrassed or ashamed, you know, and actually it's going, yeah, that's not what the research tells us. You know, that actually we need to let go of some things that may have worked and been effective at one time in one leadership role or one style, but actually when we have research into something and we know that actually there is something behind the change that's actually going to impact more children across the school positively with greater consistency and effectiveness, we need to make sure that we spend as much time perhaps de-implementing ineffective models in order for the effective models to have space and time and capacity and to really embed.
And look, when you launch that, like there's that person sat there going, oh, we're back to this now, are we? Do you know what I mean? Like that's what they're doing. They're sitting there thinking, oh, we're back to this now with it. Well, and also, I mean, I like the Peps McRae idea of persuading people to go into the valley of potential, right? So like their habits are established and then like, and they've got a certain level of effectiveness due to those habits. But the minute they change those habits, there's going to be a period where they are ineffective. And you need to persuade people to fall into that habit. And so if it means taking away something that they're doing, I think that's an easier sell than adding, because probably like it's going to make something else ineffective. But it's a difficult sell. But then there's a way of doing it, and I think we haven't really codified that as a leadership. We haven't really codified that. We don't really have really good examples. Like no one ever stands up and goes, yeah, this is how I de-implemented like photocopy and stuff on pink, orange, and blue paper so SLT could check. Do you know what I mean? No one ever stands up and says that. Like no one ever says, oh yeah, this is how I de-implemented us doing this like really weak literacy strategy. Like this is what I did, and so that we could then push this one in place. Everyone just goes, oh yeah, this was the literacy strategy. Yeah, we did this at our school. It really worked. Do you know, like then you should try it. Like that's kind of the culture that we've got in our like body. I guess you don't sing a song about, you know, scientists don't write about the research that failed, right? Or you know, they don't. Or you don't see as much of it. They do. But you just don't.
The research does fail. It will sit on the EF, but it won't hit the headline. It will only when you search for it and go, oh, so that was quite expensive and not very impactful, right?
Yeah, well, the null hypothesis has been like essentially proved, and then and you don't see that in the front of Nature. You know, like you don't see fidget spinners don't work. You don't see that like front and center headlines. You'll see the only the positive results. So I see. Do you know what I mean? But I think maybe there should be a little bit of that in our profession to stop that kind of group thinky cultism like kind of coming out. What I really want to think about as well, because look, I'm a direct instruction kind of guy, right? But do you think currently, and I wanted to be challenged on this, do you think direct instruction is a new cult that's coming into schools?
I think there's the terminology behind it feels like that. I don't think the style and the way of doing it and the need for direct instruction within lessons is in and of itself bad. I think it must be done, and I know you will lean towards doing this more. And this came up when we talked about creativity, didn't it? And is teaching a kind of creative expression. And I still, I think, hold on to the fact that in primary with young children, you're not going to continue to have their engagement if when they're with the same teacher all day, every day, and they're moving through a variety of different lessons, you do have to have variation in what they're doing, what that looks like, to continue to have that kind of engagement. So you're going to have some times of direct instruction, but you're also going to have some times when they're going to apply what they've learned in a different way, and that we want to be doing that in different ways for different subjects at different points. So to give them concrete experiences to hand those things on. But I think the more we talk about adaptive teaching versus differentiation versus direct instruction, I think all of these kind of terms have valuable places, but what matters is each school's understanding of those terms and what that looks like within their teaching and learning strategy. And that's what is crucial, to break out of we're doing this because groupthink, or because I've read a fantastic book, or because the senior leader heard someone talk about this, and go, right, I've processed this, I understand what this means, here's what that looks like for our school, for our curriculum, for our teachers. And this is what that's going to look like here for us. And that there's that culture where that's understood and there's the buy-in for that. And recognizing that if we get that right, and that doesn't mean it stays the same, like over time that will adapt and change as the needs of children, as the government or DFE or Ofsted or whoever's shouting loudest about what they want to see when they come in is going to naturally make a difference towards the approach and what takes precedent and priority. But ultimately, none of those things are wrong in and of themselves if they've been taken, understood, shared in a meaningful way, have that research behind them that means actually everyone in that school understands what that means for them and how that means their children are succeeding.
Yeah.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
I mean, what's super interesting, what's been really interesting to me at the moment on X, especially, like this whole discussion about cognitive science becoming a dogma. it's like it's such an intriguing perspective. I don't agree with it. I am not in the camp. It's that like and Carl Hendrick did a superb kind of article a couple of days ago on it. But it's quite an interesting thing to think that some of our profession think that cognitive science is a new dogma that is slowly being thrust upon our profession, and is kind of taking away certain liberties and certain liberties from teachers and children. I find that really interesting, and I find that interesting when like, cause look, I'm a scientist, right? Like, and I've explained it, right? So cognitive science, it's always been something I've been interested in. I remember the first time I read about spaced learning at the start of my career in 2009, and I was like, damn, that's like it's intuitive. And I always wanted like neural models for the way people learn, because I just didn't understand how we just keep throwing like darts at a dartboard that we can't see in the dark. Do you know what I mean? I just couldn't understand that. And then, like I said, the pain of doing that was horrific. So then obviously cognitive science has come along, and and it's not come along actually. It's just the research has become more readily available because this research has been going for 50 years, right?
Yes.
And I'm like wholeheartedly embracing it. But then it's really interesting to think that like maybe like a significant proportion of my colleagues see it as like just another dogmatic regime that we're starting to lurch towards as a teaching body, which probably won't work. or will be harmful. And it's quite an intriguing thing for me. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I struggle, I think, because like when I first learned to teach over 20 years ago, we talked a lot about learning and what did we know, and that's moved on massively, but a lot of it still comes down to teachers were always fascinated about how children learn, and we might codify it and we might give it terms that we would never have used before, like cognitive science, but we do see these things come around, and spaced learning I did without calling it that when I was learning to teach, and we'd often come back to topics and we'd come back to previous topics and we'd always like recap and look at and build on what our knowledge is, and that was just what effective teachers did with total autonomy. Now what was different though was that I was in quite a progressive school. I was in a school that was interested in these things and took quite a lot of new teachers regularly to kind of being that worked closely with universities so that they continued to have those relationships and understand what was coming in and going out. The difference, I think, is that it's more widespread now, and some of that is a positive. So maybe some of this cultism is a good thing, because actually it means we're all generally working in a higher educational realm, more research based than we once were once upon a time, and actually if that has higher academic standards for all children and reduces disadvantage gap, that's a positive for children. But are we kind of reaching the gone too far end so that actually there's not real thought and clarity gone into what people are doing, rather than just following the next buzzword or next big thing or what they think?
That's the thing. Things like the learning pyramid haven't helped, because then they like the pseudo data. Do you know what I mean? Like these spurious studies, which are like, because there's evidence and there's evidence. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And that hasn't helped. And so then people market things as cognitive science, and then essentially it's not. And it's not well. Look, Oris is one of those things. You know what I mean? Like, it's not well evidenced. It's not well researched yet. Studies are going on. Do you know what I mean? But like there's randomized control trials haven't been done. There's not large scale meta studies, and then what will happen is it's that misunderstanding, isn't it? It's where someone has caught a headline and run with it.
So here's a thought, just to throw us off on a slight tangent with not too long to go. What difference is AI going to make? Is it going to help us, or is it going to hinder us? Because our capacity to find research to tell us what we want to hear is going to be massively elevated if we so chose to go down that line. Is it going to widen our understanding and exposure to more things, or is it just going to lead to more cult-like group think tank kind of experience? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can put anything you want into it and it will give you loads of research, because it will look at everything. So unless you ask it to be quite critical and really analyse that, is that a danger for us as educational leaders?
I would say you do the thinking, let it do the legwork, right? And if you haven't done the thinking, then don't ask it. That's basically where I go on it. If you're going to get to write like a curriculum document for you, and you didn't do the initial thinking, like then beware that this thing is going to essentially, it could lie. It will just do something to placate the fact that you requested it to do something. It will just use like algorithmic kind of like lexicon models to then like come up with an answer which is plausible. but then
then we need inspectors or people who are coming in and delving deeper and recognizing that just because a document looks fancy and seems to tick all the boxes, they need to be able to delve a little bit deeper and see, has the thought gone into that, or has someone just tried to replicate something that looks effective on the surface, but there's no depth of thought that's gone into it?
And go in the classroom, innit? They need to go in the classroom, and like this is something I wanted to. So that's something you need to go in the classroom. And unfortunately, hopefully, this is what AI will promote. I'm just going to do this quickly. So don't forget, we've got a TTR newsletter. Have you subscribed to our weekly news yet? It's called Sound Bites and Insights, and it's delivered to 10,000 educators a week. It contains a curated selection of 4 standout TTR shows from the week, exclusive discounts and exclusive offers from our sponsors. Sign up on our website at ttrradio.org/newsletter. John Cat. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational Publishers, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Yeah, go in the classroom, innit? That because look, AI will fool you, it will fool someone else, but AI is not in front of kids yet, right? It's not in front of classrooms. You need to go in the classroom and see. You need to maybe ask some kids what they learned 3 months ago, and what the teacher told them 3 months ago, and then essentially you'll see as a leader, and Ofsted are obviously in that position that it's their job to do that. So I think that's the key with AI. Like if you're not willing to do the thinking, then don't use it. Like it's just not. You're gonna get rubbish. But it does the legwork. Like it will do the legwork if you've done enough thinking behind it, and you've even from an iterative perspective where you've honed your input and you know exactly what you want, then you can get something out of it. However, you can get something which is plausible but useless, and then if you roll that out as a strategy across your school, more for you, because someone's going to see that. So this is the other cult that I think we've got in leadership, and I've always thought about this, like the cult of lazy leadership, right? Which is you want to look in a spreadsheet, or you want to see a document, or you want to see a policy, and then you want to see documents about how that policy has been implemented, and then you want to see the evidence on paper. Do you know what I mean? And you want to sit in your office and you want to do all that. And this is the other cult that I think about when it comes to leadership. And I think this is another thing that, like you've said it, right? If Ofsted inspector comes and looks at this, they don't that much anymore by the sounds of it, though. You know, I haven't been through an Ofsted recently, but we do have that sort of cult in certain pockets and certain areas. And I think maybe AI is going to make it harder to do that, you know, or maybe suspicion and like kind of that skepticism around the use of AI might precipitate people to go out and go, has this been generated on AI? Let's go check in the classroom.
Yeah. And I think that's no bad thing. I think that kind of triangulation of what you see, what they say, what's on paper, and hearing that is only a positive, as long as there's a big enough sample, because that's always my frustration, right? There's been reports, and I literally have sat there and one child has said, did we do anything in DT last week? And then 5 others have gone, yeah, we made bridges and we did sewing and we cooked this whole World War II meal. And they're going, oh yeah. But the bit that goes in is one child couldn't recall prior learning in a DT project. Like, is that a fair representation of that conversation? Like, and these are 7, 8, 9-year-old children. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not excusing it, because they absolutely need to be able to recall the things that they need to be able to know. But it's having that, I don't know, a little bit of human understanding perhaps comes into it. And I think you were absolutely right when we started talking about Ofsted, in that there is just no clarity there, and it's so up for interpretation. So it still remains luck of the inspector. Until we can move away from luck of the inspector, you know, being able to be consistent in those judgments and what that comes out with, we're always going to have this kind of model where an inspection happens, someone hears something, it gets passed around a group of schools, everyone starts worrying because they don't have a British values display that says X, Y, Z on it, and their children couldn't name all the protected characteristics off the top of their head backwards whilst counting to 7 and skipping. And so everyone suddenly thinks, right, what are we going to do about that then? And
implement. Let's just implement, everyone. Yeah, do you know what I mean? That's what I think we like. That is the driver. I'm not blaming people in schools. It's not them. It's not malicious. Like this build of cult. But that's what I'm blaming. I think it's the accountability models that we've got. On top of it all, we've got this raft of consultancy that then like pushes ideas. And if one of the things is being, one of the frameworks in leadership is how good your CPD is for your staff, and you buy into this raft of consultancy strategies and etc., and they push their own agendas, well, then we can just be awash in these half-baked ideas, and that, I think that's what I find worrying. But
and that must be harder in secondary when you've got so many different departments focused on totally different things, right? Whereas at least there's some kind of consistency coming together in CPD approaches and things across primary, but I don't know, it might be entirely wrong.
Oh, let's end on a positive. There's 1 minute left.
Okay.
I think we're moving out of it. I think cognitive science is a route out. I think if that's effectively applied, it'd be great. I think the framework has improved, and I think people like Dylan Williams suggesting to de-implementation is massive. I think it's huge. I think that will find its way into MPQs.
Yeah.
I think we were more culty 10 years ago, and I think we've got less culty.
There you go. That sounds like a good positive to me to end on.
But we've still got a ways to go, right?
Absolutely, as always with everything in education. Great to chat to you tonight.
You too, Claire. Great. On that note, we'll call it a day there. Right, we'll see you all. Don't forget to tune into the other TTR shows. Like they go all week. Just look at Twitter and it'll pop up, or go to Podbean and find TTR there. And also don't forget to go to Spotify and go and put in TTR, and you can hear all the other podcasts. I think we see each other next on the 9th of July. Would that be right?
That second Wednesday?
Yeah, second Wednesday in July. So tune in on the second Wednesday of July, live on TTR. And don't forget, if you missed, if you miss anything, you can catch up on Spotify. Right.
Real. Take care. Cheers.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.